Before I get started, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here today. And today I am going to talk to you about two things. Thank you so much. So I'm going to talk to you about two things today. Designers, who are my users, and design systems, what they are and who they serve, and how we can evolve them in the future. Defining design today is really messy business. It's something we learned about earlier. Design is so many things. It can be a field, a process, an action, a proposal, and even an outcome. And designers are supposed to be good at all of it. But at the intersection of all of these types of designs is different kinds of relationships. Relationships between what we make and what we think, relationships between people that we work with who may have very different definitions of design, and relationships between products and users, all driven by decisions, small decisions that we make over time. With so many different decisions to make, systems are put in place to govern the small things that organizations have already aligned around, and automate those rote, small tasks that designers used to do, like drawing rectangles. Ask any designer, and they'll tell you that they want to make the world a better place. Design is not about designers. Design is about problem solving for people and their environment. Often in design system talks, we focus on the technical achievements of systems. But today I'd like to talk about how design systems have the potential to not only help businesses be more efficient and resourceful, but also to help designers make a human impact. Today, most designers are in some kind of relationship with a design system. You either make one, or you use one, or ideally both. This is because companies are increasingly asking designers to facilitate more complex decision-making, like moving from designing products to designing machine learning services, scaling platforms, or even starting up new business models. So here's a framework for how I'm thinking about the evolution of design systems. I call it the design system hierarchy of human needs. It's scaffolded from Indy's ethics framework, and it's pretty simple. Designers make decisions about things like product UI, which manifests as components, which impact humans by way of reducing their effort. Today, it's kind of like Maslow's hierarchy, where we're at the first order of design systems, the food and water part, as the foundation for meeting basic user needs. And self-actualization sits at the top, where you're meeting higher level user needs like ensuring that human rights are present in every design decision and manifestation. So even though most of the time when we think of design systems, the first thing that comes to mind is the product UI, more complex second and third order problems can fit into design systems too. They also have a shared decision-making process. They have repeatable patterns that manifest, and most importantly, a set of human needs. So as an example, a third order problem for companies might be figuring out a business model, which is a fairly complex problem. If a company decides to open source a piece of their business, they value knowledge sharing over privatizing their intellectual property. Their impact to people, therefore, is that they offer human rights to accessible information and education. So now that you're familiar with the framework, the first order of design systems I'm going to talk about today is systems of components. So if you do a Google search on design systems in 2018, you'll find more colors and components than there are paint colors at a nail salon. And if you're wondering what I'm talking about, I Googled that too for comparison. If we actually mashed design systems together into one universal system, we may never have to design another component again. Right now, design systems are defined by how they're manifest. This is problematic because we only talk about what we can see. Today, most designer blogs or companies reference components right in the definition of design systems. But the parts add up to something more. Components are just hitting the surface of things that we can impact. But the patterns built into the component libraries can save users a tremendous amount of time. So at Airbnb, we use a pattern that suggests a price for hosts to charge based on the information that they provide us about their listing, as well as on trends that are currently shaping local rental markets, such as holidays or tourism. There's also estimates that we provide for hosts to understand the financial impact of listing their space. These designs help users make decisions based on information that we track and reduce the effort they would otherwise put in to research the right price point to list their space. So, if you're building a component system for the first time, when you use this pyramid, instead of thinking about components as code and assets, define components as the return you bring to users on the investment of the time, energy, and effort to use your product. If the patterns that you're creating aren't increasing functionality, adding convenience, or driving consistency, then no matter how good they look, components can create repeatable friction in your user interface. So this is Airbnb's product today. And once our visual design direction was set, the team went out and looked at individual screens. And then we broke out common solutions to generalizable user problems by their components. And the components were simply named and set up to be larger and very modular instead of atomic. These components all function on their own. So when you need a specific bit of functionality, you can use it across platforms and across contexts. If a component doesn't have the functionality that you need, you can make your own component using our primitives. How it works and how it looks is very specifically defined because Airbnb used their product to solve the consistency problem, so that the entire experience of using the app feels cohesive. And part of the solution was always making sure that the components were abstracted enough that they could be mirrored in code. The engineer has the same naming as the design file specs, no matter the platform. So everything is device agnostic, and you define it once, and it's made for many different form factors. When the language is the same, an engineer could code a design without seeing it. In part, this is the power of a system, the relationship that it bridges between designers and engineers, and the coherency and reliability that it builds into the relationship between a user and Airbnb's product. So, as you can see, in the first order of design systems, designers no longer just make one-off components. Their energy is dedicated to defining new parameters and new arguments for why the system functions the way it does, to reduce a user's effort, and how those decisions show up in the hands of their engineers. The second order of design systems I'm going to talk about today is systems of journeys. So even though components are the food to fuel successful design systems, we don't fall in love with products because of component libraries. On the second order of human needs, we're filling the love and belonging side of design systems by mapping a user's journey. At Airbnb, the story that drives desirability for our products is called the Snow White journey. It was Airbnb CEO Brian Chesky who picked up a copy of Walt Disney's biography over a winter holiday and realized at Airbnb that they were at a similar point in their maturity as Walt Disney's company when they started creating the film Snow White. The company had success with shorter cartoons, but Walt Disney wanted to create a feature-length film with enough depth that people would care about and not just laugh at the characters. He wanted to tell a complete story. So Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs began in the mid-1930s with a storyboard. A comic book-like outline of the story helped all of the film's collaborators understand the vision as they took on this new format. And when they did, the amazing thing was that it allowed them to align around different methods for seeing this new format. Brian Chesky similarly wanted to use storyboarding as a way to help Airbnb understand the customer experience, and the company planned its next steps. So he hired animators from Pixar and brought the company together to design an end-to-end journey for hosts and guests. All right, so it looks like we don't have any audio, and that is perfectly fine because I can tell you about the storyboards myself. So storyboards inspire a feeling. They tell us what words alone can't express. This one is my favorite storyboard in the host journey. It shows hosts and guests sharing a meal and laughing like sisters. The pictures in our storyboards, they all represent steps that hosts take along the journey. And this includes things like considering hosting, preparing the place for a guest's arrival, and building a lasting reputation as a good host. In a tech world that's full of situations that grasp for our attention and never really finish, creating narratives that actually start and end satisfies a craving we have as humans to complete a journey and really feel that sense of accomplishment. And since the Snow White boards were created, many new journeys have been designed and mapped. When we make new services, maintaining journeys is critical for capturing the feeling of each moment in the human experience. And there's additional decision-making benefits to your company. Journeys can provide key insights and shed light on opportunities around where to invest next in the experience. Journeys can also inspire collaboration across teams. So if you've already built components, but you haven't yet mapped your user's journey onto your design system, there's easy ways to get started. How you choose to make your journeys should really depend on your goals. If you want to understand how much surface area the journey is in the product and whether steps are missing, attaching UI screens to these journey boards can help. You can also track the teams who are working on each part of the journey in your company and understand if there's any teams who aren't working on a specific part. Some teams at Airbnb also create scorecards on their journeys. You can see these below. And these show scorecards around things like how things are growing or different areas of task completions and how well users are completing them. And sometimes we find that in one phase, there are many different paths that a user could take. The journey columns, they usually represent larger phases, and smaller steps or key moments of the journeys highlighted. Underneath each column, it's common to add things like user goals, add data and metrics from your research teams, and descriptions of pain points or opportunities. Always make sure when you're designing your journeys that some part has a specific focus on what the user is doing, what they're unable to do, or what they need. These things are important to capture so that you can measure them. Some of the most innovative things I've also seen in user journey mapping at Airbnb is how people include different kinds of financial models. They bring in people from legal and other departments to co-create these. Some even have rows for unintended consequences and the risk of potential bias or discrimination during a given step articulated. So each metric or milestone of a journey gives your business a high level and a granular representation of how well the experience is going, from which they can zoom in or zoom back out to make decisions with all the data and insights a company has at any given moment. The important takeaway here is that journey systems transform businesses to invest in human needs instead of product features. They make abstract experiences tangible, and they provide an honest picture to guide investments in the relationships that users have with your company. The third and final order of design systems I'm going to be talking about today is value systems. So one important distinction to make about this third order of design systems is that value systems are cultural. They're people's internalized articulation of what matters most to them. Values are shaped by lived experiences, like the ones in the Snow White journey. At Airbnb, we believe it's important to find shared values and also to respect people when their values are different and listen for understanding. Another lens is a project dedicated to helping designers and non-designers alike think about unconscious values, things they may not be thinking about unless they're prompted to rewire their brain. Some values are conscious. If you go to buy a new car, you might consciously value its safety. Other values are unconscious. When someone is new on the job, you may be more tolerant of a mistake they make without realizing that you aren't giving old-timers the same affordances. We tend to believe we can think through all perspectives, but when we're working in fast-paced environments, we are frequently asked to make snap judgments. And often, when we realize we've made a mistake, we've not been incentivized to go back and make good on our assumptions. Cornell professor Phoebe Sangers from the Culturally Embedded Computing Group says that, especially as we work with technology, reflection on our unconscious values should be a core principle for design systems. To solve challenges that go beyond a digital product and affect communities, Airbnb partnered with News Deeply to create a research tool to help us examine our values and ask questions of our designs, like, does this design provide real value and empower the community in some way? Does it enable collaboration and foster empathy across communities or disciplines? Is it foundational enough to serve as a building block that can be evolved by the community in unforeseen ways? Designers and journalists face similar challenges. We can't serve our communities without first truly understanding their needs and their stories. Like a journalist, a designer must ask the right questions. The team wanted to create an experience that made addressing biases and assumptions less abstract, moving people from self-reflection into action. They created a virtual deck of cards that put some of those most important questions at your fingertips. Each question, 15 of them in total, provides context around biases and suggests steps forward. The hope is that each question and principle can lead to more considerate, inclusive design. I believe that it really has, because recently, creative director Jennifer Hom on our design systems team refreshed our illustration styles to better reflect people who work at and use Airbnb. The most insightful part of her research phase was gathering opinions from coworkers. One key insight from Black, Asian, Latinx, and Middle Eastern coworkers that struck her was, "This style doesn't represent me." Airbnb, this is her after illustrations. Airbnb hosts, guests, and employees represent all corners of the globe, from a grandmother in Chengdu, an entrepreneur in San Francisco, empty nesters in Istanbul, and a wedding planner in Nairobi. Jennifer uses pictures of real people as references for her illustrations. Using real photos for inspiration accomplishes two things. It ensures authenticity when we depict diversity because it leaves no room for the artist to generalize or stereotype. And it stops an artist from drawing endless variations of their own face. And Jennifer has put together key practices for how to illustrate with inclusion in mind. Something critical to Airbnb's style is the inclusion of people living with disabilities, whose identities intersect with gender, race, nationality, orientation, and age. By partnering with Airbnb's employee resource group for people living with disabilities, we're able to discuss work in progress and get feedback about their lived experiences. I think design systems have the potential to not only help companies, but to also help designers make the world a better place when we focus on human rights, the rights to be seen and heard and depicted in authentic ways. And at Airbnb, this happens not only at the product level with illustrations, but also at the people level of design systems. Since its creation in 2013, the Black Lives Matter movement has increased visibility of the discrimination and systemic injustice Black Americans face on a daily basis. Sparked by Black at Airbnb's employee group and created with allies in our design and art departments, Airbnb mobilized to photograph more than 300 employees, creating space internally for more solidarity. To promote peace throughout a visual demonstration of unity, the installation of portraits documents Black employees aligned with their coworkers who support them as allies and want to do more. This internal collection was originally created to propel essential conversations about discrimination on our platform, educate peers about the Black Lives Matter movement, and use art and design as a way to help Black employees feel understood and visible within company walls. In sum, to remain relevant in the future, designers will need to hold themselves and others accountable for their unconscious values, which is much easier said than done. It may be our biggest design challenge to date. This year at South by Southwest, I watched Margaret Gould Stewart introduce what she calls the 4 quadrants of design responsibility. On the x-axis, she described from left to right what we build at an increasing scale of things from the pixel to the entire ecosystem in which your product operates. As you move towards ecosystem, constraints, interdependencies, and complexities grow in the design problem. And on the y-axis, the scale is the audience that you're designing for, starting with one individual human and working your way up to all of society. And as the scale grows, the less we can assume about who we're designing for, their motivations, their cultures, and their needs and wants. As designers, we're really comfortable in the bottom left quadrant. But as our businesses demand more of us, we will need to increasingly challenge ourselves to let go of our known quadrant and move into territory where we don't know what we don't know, and move to much larger, more interdisciplinary problem spaces. Margaret has some great recommendations on how to start taking responsibility in your designs, but my favorite is just a simple question. Often in tech, we ask ourselves if we're able to build something. Is it feasible? Are we allowed to build something? Has leadership approved it? But we need to bring back the essential question of should we? Recently, I took a photo of a page in a book where in the 60s, Charles Eames described designing a lamp. He said, the first step in designing a lamp, or anything, was not to ask how it should look, but whether it should even be. In closing, if you think about design systems through the lens of human needs, systems won't replace designers. But designers do need to replace our myopic focus on design systems as the way they manifest, and move beyond components to ask ourselves, what other systems can we influence to drive towards even higher human impact? These could be things like financial systems, healthcare systems, justice systems, management systems, political systems, and just as important, what are the systems currently in place where we impact user needs in undesirable ways, and how do we fix those? I'd like to pose a provocation for you. Maybe our hierarchy is upside down. Now that components have gotten us so far in reducing human effort to complete tasks and help users accomplish their goals, what if we spent more time on understanding human rights as the foundation for our systems and started building up from there? Human rights like access, safety, sustainability, openness, tolerance, respect, dignity, inclusion, and providing closure to an experience. Consider which human rights you would frame your system around. Would this way of thinking change the experiences you design for and the effort you ask users to give for the value that you provide them? If good design is good business, the common denominator is doing good. So when designers are freed up by systems to think bigger, let's reach for the highest form of impact that we can imagine and do good by the people design is meant to benefit, by fulfilling human needs and creating a better world with systems. Thank you.